So good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the British Chamber of Commerce International Women's Day webinar. My name is Richard Warburton, and I'm the president of the Chamber here in Singapore. So the Chamber has been leading on diversity, inclusion, and equality since 2014, and we've held a flagship IWD event every year in partnership with our total partner, Barclays. This year, we have hosted a combination of 3 in-person and digital activities for you to enjoy. We kicked off this series with a lunch on Tuesday, and that featured Amanda Murphy, Head of Commercial Banking for South and Southeast Asia at HSBC. Yesterday, we released a special episode onto the Chamber's podcast channel featuring Yan Lai, Professor of Digital Transformation, Department of Information Systems, Decision Science and Statistics at ESSEC Business School Asia Pacific. And finally, closing this series today, we very much look forward to hearing from our distinguished panel of business leaders on this engaging and interactive webinar. As I say, today will be another interactive session. So if you would like to ask our panelists a question, please do post using the dedicated Q&A box on your Zoom toolbar. The chat box is also open for your comments throughout the session, so please do get involved and please do ask questions if you'd really like to ask the panelists something. So before we get started, I would really like to say thank you to Barclays for their continued support of this important annual event. We're also joined by supporting partners today, St James's Place, Mercer, NatWest Markets and Swire Shipping, who have all pledged their support of this important agenda. And we have representatives from every partner on this call here today. So it is my great pleasure now to invite Andrew Ashman, Head of Loan Syndication APAC for Barclays, to begin this session. Over to you, Andrew.
Great, thank you, Richard. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's International Women's Day webinar. My name is Andrew Ashman. I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. I work for Barclays, based here in Singapore, and I'm also the chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee at BritCham in Singapore. And on behalf of Barclays, we're really proud to be supporting this event. Gender equality is a strategic pillar for us, and we're extremely focused on supporting women achieve career success, both within the firm and also the broader business community. But why are we so focused on this topic? Well, we've seen firsthand how diverse teams produce better commercial outcomes. Employees who better represent our stakeholders, particularly our customers, will always bring a more balanced perspective to decision-making, to risk-taking, and ultimately will drive better client solutions, which naturally leads to commercial success and increased financial performance. So in our view, gender equality is not just the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do. But moving on to today's panel, under the overarching theme of break the bias, we will be debating these points from a number of different perspectives. Firstly, we'll be looking at the practical changes that can be made to support gender equality at the corporate level, at the manager level, and at the individual level. We'll be calling for action and discuss what needs to be done to accelerate this change, particularly with respect to bringing allies on board to contribute and drive the momentum. We'll be discussing the impact of COVID and whether this has provided an opportunity or a roadblock for advancement. And we'll also investigate the role of education, setting principles early in life for people as they start their career journey. Now, to debate these topics, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers from some very diverse backgrounds. We have Tamara Gillen, founder of the Wealthy Her Network and CEO and founder of Cherry London. We have Rama Balasubramanian, Managing Director for Southeast Asia at Google Cloud. And we have Karma Elliott, College President at UWC Southeast Asia, based here in Singapore. Now, before we move on to the formal part of the debate, we wanted to show a short video from a group of students at North London Collegiate School. It's a fascinating video and provides a real insight into the minds of young students as they are about to embark on their career journey. The video was put together by the Chamber's International Women's Day event team and was first shown in person at the lunch on Tuesday. I'm told the video can be a little glitchy when played over Zoom, so please do bear with us. We are distributing the link directly to you as well, so you can watch it again after this session. But please feel free to share the link with colleagues and friends. And on that note, I'll pass back to Helen to start the video.
So why are we actually making this video? Well, obviously it's International Women's Day, which is really important for all of us. And it's really important for us, particularly now, because we're going to be going into university soon, going into the workplace after that, and we really want to send a message from our generation. We'll be talking about a few things we're worried about, but we'll also be going to talk about some things we're optimistic about. The one thing that we really want to emphasize from this video is how important role models really are for us and how they can make such a big difference.
My biggest worry of all is my effort being overlooked in a field of research because of my gender. I don't want to hide my femininity or my identity to be respected and recognized for my work.
When people think of an entrepreneur, they don't really think of a woman, especially a young woman and a young woman of color. I'm just concerned for myself as well as so many other women, and especially women of color, to be seen as other in these industries.
Something really big for me is the idea of in the future having to choose between work and a family. It's shocking to see how women are still marginalized in the workplace even today.
They are often expected to take on more important roles in the domestic sphere, and this almost gender-neutral competition is making it even harder for women to succeed, especially when compared to their male counterparts.
I know that in previous generations, women weren't thought of as being capable to come up with their own thoughts. They were cast aside as the second gender and not given the chance to prove themselves competent. We're very lucky that the world has progressed to a stage where we are no longer shunned from society due to our gender.
We are aware that we're going to have to work harder just because we are women, and it's undeniable that there is gender inequality in the world, but we're not afraid to stand up anymore. We've seen that women can be successful, and we're honestly really optimistic about it.
And what we really need is other women there beside us, to have role models, to have people to look up to. We are able to truly see for ourselves that it is possible.
I think now we live in a world where the previous generation of women are they've been carving their own paths in these industries, and they've been leading the way for the next generation of women. And right now, women are starting to write their own narratives, and I think that's something really powerful and really beautiful at once.
Now we're constantly able to look up to new female role models, and in future generations, kids will grow up seeing more women in power as a new norm. In the future, we won't have to come across as many firsts for women in the workplace. My role model is Emma Watson. As well as being a UN ambassador and starting a feminist campaign, she does not sacrifice her beliefs or femininity for power in such a public field, such as acting and entertainment that's open for so much judgment, especially in this generation.
I basically grew up watching Michelle Phan's YouTube videos. I am so inspired of how she made it so quickly in the world as a young 22-year-old Asian woman. She has this extremely inspiring understanding of the world we live in today and what people want. But all the while, everything that she does, she stays true to who she is as a person.
My role model is Esther Duflo. She is the youngest and also the second woman to receive the Nobel Prize in Economics. Her win proves that women can be successful and recognized. She hopes to inspire more women to devote themselves to economics and for men to give women the respect that they deserve and that everyone should deserve.
Role models aren't just celebrities. For me personally, one of my biggest role models is someone who I see practically every day, my English teacher, Miss Holden. She's inspired me since I met her when I was about 12 years old, and she introduced me to her passion for feminism. I remember sitting in an assembly one day and seeing her stand up and talk about her amazing passion for English. And I remember thinking, she's wearing a really cool outfit. And I just thought, it's so cool how she was able to talk about what she's passionate about. And I'm inspired to just be myself, to talk about what I want to talk about, to wear what I want to wear, to express myself, and to genuinely just, like Miss Holden, be myself.
One of my role models that really encouraged me to step into the field of research and engineering is Ms. Yvonne Tan, an engineer and project manager at Dyson. When I met her, she talked about some of the difficulties and obstacles she faced on her path of becoming an engineer, as well as now as an engineer working in a male-dominated field. But she also let me know that I should not be afraid to pursue my passions in science.
The outstanding factor among all of these women is that they refuse to be subservient. They refuse to accept that they need to change themselves. For us at least, a true model is someone who doesn't give up their beliefs in order to progress.
We understand that there are still so many barriers that need to be broken, but we do hope to live in a world where we don't need to put women in front of a job title as a description, or woman in front of anything as a description, and to just live in a world where there's no such thing as default and there's no such thing as other.
To be successful isn't to be a man. In the past and even nowadays, male is the gender neutral. But all of these role models are truly showing that you don't have to be. You just have to be yourself.
We need these role models to show us that the world is changing. We need to keep hearing stories about successful women. It's impossible to overemphasize how important this is for the future. Having role models, whether that's at home, at school, in sports or anything, can be an absolute game changer for young girls all over the world.
We know we're going to face challenges. We know it's going to be tough. But yeah, bring it on.
Wow, a very powerful video there. Some very insightful comments from some such young minds. We've got a lot of content in that video to discuss on the panel discussion today. There's quite a lot of takeaways that I'd like to touch on. But before we go into that, I'd really just like the panelists to spend a few minutes introducing themselves. Maybe if each panelist could introduce themselves and give a little bit of background on their involvement in driving gender equality. And then we'll move into the broader discussion. So maybe can I start with Tamara to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Tamara Gillen. I'm an entrepreneur. I've owned several businesses, and in 2019, I started the Wealthy Her Network with a mission to economically advance women. We do that by understanding the needs of women with a global research program, which spans the UK, Hong Kong, Singapore, China, looking at the different needs of women, whether that's with regards to overall esteem, financial confidence. The importance of role models, which we see in those young women, is vital, and we see it in our research for all women. And so International Women's Day and this conversation are really important to everything that we do. And we were discussing it on the panel before we came on. I believe it's not just a day, it's actually a day, a week, but even a moment to set our intent for the year ahead and all the things we intend to do. So that is why these conversations are so important for the next gen that we just heard. So movingly from.
Thank you, Tamara. Some interesting insights there, which we'll delve into in more detail. But maybe Rama, if you could give us a bit of an introduction to yourself as well.
Yeah, hi Andrew, and hi everyone. It's just wonderful to be here, and really privileged to be on the panel with Tamara and Karma. And Andrew, thank you so much for facilitating today. So my name is Rama, and I'm the managing director for Google Cloud in Southeast Asia. I oversee what I like to call the 6 most amazing countries across the world, including Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, and the Philippines. And it was wonderful to see many of the women representing the Southeast Asia region in the video earlier. The region is incredibly diverse, 650 million people, And a huge part of that population doesn't have access to technology or is just emerging in terms of their access to technology. So the thing that I'm really passionate about is to ensure that every single member and resident of the Southeast Asia region has the capability and the opportunity to embrace technology to make their lives better.
Fantastic. I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights on women in technology as well, and how you advance women in STEM. That's going to be an interesting debate. And last but not least, Karma, if you could perhaps introduce yourself.
Lovely, thank you, Andrew, and it's nice to be here to meet everybody through this event, this important event. And I'm particularly excited. Ruma and Tamara have set out such inspiring approaches that they take both in their professional careers and with their colleagues, to be able to have a dialogue between us as well as answering the questions that are coming in, because it is, of course, not just one day. I've got a background that says International Women's Day, but every day is International Women's Day, really. And so, you know, opportunities to talk about the actions that we can take. And in the past, I've had the privilege, I was previously a British diplomat, and for many, many years, and I've spent most of my adult life in China, but also in Saudi Arabia. And I've also worked in North Korea. So some very different environments in which, you know, the issues around gender diversity and women's economic empowerment are looked at in very different ways. But I think in particular, one of the things that really struck me from that video was those young women talking about carving a path and writing a narrative. So I think it's incumbent on us really to really think through what we as individuals, but collectively can do to help identify for those young women how they can occupy the space that they're clearly aiming for in the future as well. So using that inspiration from individual inspiring women to inspire the next generation as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carmen. Clearly some very interesting, diverse geographic perspectives that you can add to the discussion as well. But your comments are a very good segue into the first question, the first topic I wanted to cover, which was indeed the video. And I know one of the comments that really struck me was that women have to work harder to make their way in the world. And I know during the making of the video, many of the students discussed the conflicts between family and career. As an educator, Karma, how do you feel about that? What do you see as the role of education in building principles for these students as they're starting their journey?
I would say that you know, the important thing is from a very young age, you know, so for K-12 schools like our own, to really start early. You know, there's a lot of research and data which shows that stereotyping amongst really quite young children starts from the age of 6 onwards. You know, girls and boys really identifying with careers and future careers being for boys or for girls, but very few thinking through how to challenge some of those gender stereotypes, of course, at that young age. But I think what we can all ourselves do is, you know, providing those role models. We heard, you know, if those ideas are being formed at the age of 6, and you know those ideas are being formed often in the home, but of course in society in which the young people are growing up as well. So I do think it's incumbent on us, whether it's in the home but also through education and more widely. We heard a lot there in that video about role models. We heard about the role of a teacher in inspiring next generation, so that, you know, young people see both representative diversity when it comes to gender and other aspects of diversity, but also, you know, being able to look at addressing any challenges, you know, how to carve that path for the future as well. So if you, you know, inspiring girls in particular, it is, you know, heavily weighted even from the age of 6, shown 100, you know, ask 100 children about, you know, a racing driver, for example, and ask them to draw it, they'll draw a man. And, you know, it comes to about, usually in most countries around the world, about 92% of children, and even at that young age, would draw a man. So I think it's incumbent on all of us, men and women alike, and to inspire girls to consider the widest range of careers for as long as possible. So how do they occupy that space? So if they want to be an English teacher, as we heard there, or they want to be an economist, that those girls, those careers are equally important to them as they are to boys, and that working together they can support each other to achieve their individual ambitions as well. So, you know, that starts early, it continues in school, needs to be supported by the home to see that kind of diversity of opportunity reflected in all those different ways.
No, I agree, and it's a joint partnership between the school and the educators and the family and the parents, I think, to instill those principles in all our children. But, maybe moving on to Roma, you're a role model, a woman in tech, a very male-dominated field. What were some of your takeaways from that video? Was there anything that resonated with you?
Yeah, absolutely. That video was absolutely inspiring. I felt a few tears well up actually as I was watching it. It was just amazing how articulate those young women were, and I do think that, you know, that is the norm of how young girls and women are thinking today, which is again quite inspiring. You know, perhaps it made me reflect a little bit on my own childhood, and you know, I am an Asian woman. I grew up in a Western environment, and you know, I remember sort of thinking about and sort of hearing words around the house in my own family about sort of it being the norm, having to balance work and family. And so as I was growing up and selecting a career, you know, I had incredible interest in math and science. You know, I really tried to think about how work could fit into my life rather than my life fitting into my work. And I think that's a really important thing to instill in young women, is that, you know, there are so many choices around how women can really think about that work-life balance. Technology can really help in that way. You know, simple things like, for example, as a Google employee, you know, I have access to my calendar like we all do. One of the features that we have inside that calendar is something called focus time. And, you know, so many of my colleagues use that focus time as really sacred and precious time that they have with their families. So whenever you go and schedule a meeting with another Googler, as we like to call ourselves, you know, you have to respect that focus time, because that's time that's really important to your colleague. And that time can be used for anything. It can be used for thinking time. It can be used for spending time with your family. It can be used for running errands. And I think that's really a way in which technology can support the balance that many women crave. And it's not just many women, but many men as well crave, especially as we think about emerging from a post-COVID life.
Yeah, I think there's a lesson there for all of us, Roma. I think focus time is very important in all aspects of our career and work-life balance. So Tamara, you're a female entrepreneur. Would you give us your takeaways from the video and your perspectives as a female entrepreneur?
Absolutely. And actually just picking up on what Roma said, I think actually that focus time is so important, because what I've seen from women is we are working from home, but actually we're doing longer hours. And so finding those focus moments to think or to be with our family and making that clear and setting those boundaries is such a great solution. And I've definitely needed that as an entrepreneur, as a mother, as a leader. I've written down, how do I find how to put this focus time in my diary? But as an entrepreneur watching the video, you know, I know that 8 out of 10 children cannot name a single female entrepreneur. So, you know, and actually, again, going back to Karma's point in education, entrepreneurship is seen more as a male domain. I was lucky, I came from an entrepreneurial family. It was always what I was going to do. So I think that those role models are so important. Like Roma, I was also really, I found it, I love their optimism and I love their strength. And then I just sat there also listening, thinking about the theme for International Women's Day around biases. It's our responsibility to shore their path and take their optimism. I've seen research from one of our collaborators, Michelle King, that says after 3 years of a young woman coming into the workforce, her confidence declines, and it declines significantly. So I see it as our responsibility and in all of us and all of our people in influence to make sure that that passion and that confidence stays and continues to grow.
Yeah, it's everyone's responsibility at the end of the day. As a manager as well, you want to allow your employees to blossom as well. So it's important that we all are aware of that element, I think, and take that on board. Great. Okay. What I'd like to do now is just move on to the theme of the panel discussion, the break the bias theme, which is this year's International Women's Day tagline, and just understand from each of you what it means on a personal level to you, and maybe Tamara, keeping with you on camera, what barriers have you managed to break down? Could you give us a bit of an overview of some of the challenges that you've seen and how you've got over them?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have seen through our research is that women, actually overall esteem, female esteem versus male esteem is lower. It varies from markets. Actually, the UK has a much lower self-esteem for women than traditional Asia or Hong Kong, Singapore, China, although Singapore also has lower self-esteem for women. But how that also plays out is into financial confidence and financial education. And what impact that is having from an economic point of view is women are not engaging in the same way in financial decision making, particularly pensions or long-term financial decision making, which is impacting their prosperity. And given that the role of wealth for women is to prepare for, secure their life for the family, often education, it has a really important role to play. But actually, one of the things through our research which really heartened us over several years is, in fact, we're starting to see financial confidence and financial confidence rise over the years that we've been working on this. And education is the key. And actually, ironically, financial autonomy is a number one driver of female overall well-being, so that we feel really heartened that this united effort with our partners working together, Barclays was one of our founding partners in the UK, HSBC globally, we're starting to work together, all of us working together, and we're seeing a movement. And I think that research is really important, so you understand where the bias is, what's going on, but what you're doing is working or not working. And I think a united effort of an entire industry working together makes it possible to have real impact versus going it alone. Great.
Okay. So it's incumbent on the banks, the financial services industry, all of us to promote financial autonomy with women as well. That's a really important message to take away. Roma, you must have seen some challenges in your career trajectory, and how have you overcome some of those barriers in the tech industry?
Yeah, perhaps I want to add a small story to Tamara's example and data around self-confidence. I think that's a really important topic to perhaps anchor on a little bit. I've over the years really thought about self-confidence as a product of empowerment and psychological safety. And I think, those are really important things that I like to think about when it comes to this year's theme, because you can only break the bias when women speak out. And women can only speak out if they have a sense of self-confidence that's nurtured through empowerment and psychological safety. One small example I'd like to share is when I first came into Singapore about 15 years ago now. I've had a number of APAC roles. This particular role, covered the entire Asia Pacific region, including Korea. My very first trip to Korea, I went in and, we had about 100 employees in the room. And of course, you do sort of an all hands meeting and you talk to your team and, share a little bit about the business strategy, and they ask questions. Our country leader for Korea instructed his team. He said, I want you to write down a question for Rama during the all hands that you can, stand up and ask her. And it was just so amazing because, I finished my remarks, I opened it up for questions, and there was a young Korean woman who stood up, and frankly, I don't even know what question she asked, but the level of self-confidence that she had, to me, was just so courageous. And that story has stuck with me for 15 years. So when I think about breaking the bias, I think about that story. And to me, it's just incredibly powerful as, I go around the region, I think about, how do I expand career development opportunities for young women? How do I think about mentoring and really, promoting mentoring opportunities? So breaking the bias to me is really all about that sense of empowerment and then ensuring that women in particular have psychological safety so that they can really speak out and express themselves.
Fantastic. I think that's a message that came out in the video as well, very much from the girls, in terms of being able to do what they wanted to do in life, and a very powerful message to put as well. Thank you. Karma, as a global educator, you must have seen some different challenges in different parts of the world. Have you got any perspectives on breaking the bias?
Well, maybe just tell a quick story. I mentioned before some of the other countries that I've worked in, and including as a diplomat, and really picking up on something that Ruma said, the importance of mentorship and also sponsoring people within the workplace as well, sponsoring young women, also young men, of course, but very particular focus on young women. And I worked previously in Saudi Arabia, and I was the first sort of frontline, so externally facing female British diplomat in Saudi Arabia, but I was also the director for trade and investment for the UK for Saudi Arabia. And so the assumption, I think, previously that had been made is those kind of jobs might not attract women to take them on, but also that they wouldn't necessarily be accepted by the sort of interlocutors that one was dealing with. And actually, on the just really to understand, some of the gender bias that's inherent in a society like that. Actually, the biggest challenges I found were on the British side rather than on the Saudi side, because actually there's a great tradition of honouring, if your employer, and in this case it was the Queen, had sent me to represent her in a country, that somehow there was that acceptance that I was I was probably up to the job, and that was quite interesting, but it really did break down many barriers. It was defined as being considered an honorary man. So in the workplace, I was considered an honorary man, but actually the benefit was that actually I was able to deal with both the male business community and the female business community. And of course, in many societies like Saudi Arabia, women do have considerable business interests, and often the inheritance laws are very protective of women. And of course, my male diplomatic counterparts were not able to do that. So I used to sort of joke with my employer I should be paid twice, one for dealing with the men and one for dealing with the the female business community. But joking aside, what it meant as well was through breaking a sort of some sort of old taboos about what might or might not be possible in a country such as Saudi Arabia. It also meant that, and it was at the time when terrorism was at its height, and we had large number of security guards, armed protection, and so on. But we also needed to introduce more security to enter our workplace. And of course, we had females coming into the workplace, but we didn't have any female security guards. So for the first time ever, we employed female security guards specifically to work in that way. And many of them were young Saudis who had never previously been offered employment opportunities as well. So both in terms of a particular career that had always been seen as male, actually, the restrictions that there are around female economic engagement in countries like that, it did actually mean that there was a job that could only be done by women as well. So yeah. Stereotyping working in reverse in some respects, but actually it was really wonderful to see the respect with which those young women were shown by their male counterparts, because they were on the front line of what was quite a difficult security environment as well, and very much in their own context, breaking down some barriers and some biases about what women were capable of, and what sort of confidence levels women had for dealing with some quite stressful and unsafe conditions as well. So that was a great example of actually providing the sort of frameworks for others to use to develop their own, as was said before, carving a path, as it were. So one can do that oneself, but one can also create the conditions in which that becomes possible, which I think is probably, when you reach a certain stage in your career, is probably something, and certainly I find that creating those conditions is most rewarding in that respect. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think your point about as a woman, being able to get access to different types of people, different stakeholders is very important as well. And it gives you a unique position in the business world and being able to do your job, which is something that we should all take away. I know one of the Ramo, you've discussed already some of the work that you're doing around mentorship in your firm. I just wanted to talk about some practical examples of best practices that we're seeing in helping to drive the gender equality equation. I know you're doing a lot of work in Google Cloud on other aspects, but would you be able to share some of your findings and what some of the initiatives that you're inputting to drive the equality equation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Andrew. I'll probably talk about 4 different areas. The first one is really around unbiasing training, and I'll probably talk about, why that's so important to us. The second area is, of course, we are a product and platform company. So a lot of what we're doing right now is around inclusive product design. The third area is how we really leverage the power of our entire Google community to essentially multiply our DEI principles. And then the final piece is about data, how we measure results on a very regular basis. So a little bit about unconscious bias training. So, we think our people are amazing. And one of the first things that we ask them to do when they come into the company is to hire more amazing people like them. We don't take hiring lightly. In fact, when a person comes in, even before they can be approved to go and hire, they have to go through hiring training, and they have to be mentored by an experienced hiring manager. The other thing that they have to do is to go through unconscious bias training. And in fact, we've had 20,000 employees go through that training over the past several years. The reason this is so important to us is that there is a science behind biases. And for our Googlers to truly understand that science and be incredibly thoughtful about the way that they interview candidates is incredibly important. We want the best people on the planet to come and work for our organization. And we want to do that regardless of gender, regardless of culture, regardless of disability, any of that. And so this unconscious bias training is really an integral part of our culture. The second area is around inclusive product design. Today we have over 12,000 engineers who have gone through training on inclusive design, and 25% of those individuals are actually based right here in Asia. So again, why is this important to us? Fun fact: when YouTube was first introduced as a platform, it turns out about 5 to 10% of the videos that were uploaded onto the platform were actually uploaded upside down. And the reason for that is that the upload button was actually designed for people who are right-handed. Very simple example, right? So that means that left-handed individuals, users, couldn't actually upload videos, in a manner that was conducive to their ability. Very, very simple example, but this is the kind of thoughtfulness that we have to put into our product design so that we can ensure that we reach as many users as possible. The third area that I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes on is one that I am really personally touched by because it's impacted so many of our enterprise customers across Southeast Asia. And it's called the #IamRemarkable program. And it's we've actually rolled it out now globally to 250,000 people across the world. It's actually a program that started in Europe. And the foundational aspect of that program is to go out and basically teach women how to speak up. It's to run workshops on how to do that. And we started it internally as a Google program. Now we're basically running it across our customer base as well. And it's had incredible adoption. And then the final piece is, Google as an information and data company, we take that very seriously, and we do the same thing around diversity, equity, and inclusion metrics. Every year we have a diversity report that I hope you will all look at because it'll share with you the depth of detail that we go into that. And one of the things that we're very transparent about is the number of hires we have, the number of women that we have in leadership positions. Just, again, a few data points to share there. We have in this region, 36% of our hires across the Asia Pacific region are women, and that's higher than our global average of 28%. Clearly a long way to go, but we're trending a little bit better than the rest of the world. A second really interesting fact is that 29% of the leadership roles in our company are actually occupied by women here in Asia Pacific. Again, that's versus 28% globally. So again, a long way to go, but it helps us really understand where we are in the journey. So those are the four things that I think are very, very special about the way, we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's something that we sort of live and practice every single day.
Great, some amazing best practices there. It's really good to hear of what you're doing on a practical basis in the company, and I hope some tips that we can all take away to our own companies. Tamara, I know you've been involved in a number of initiatives. Perhaps could you give some practical examples of the work that you've done to break down the gender parity equation?
Absolutely. I mean, we have the privilege at Wealthy Her of working with Girl Up, which is a United Nations Foundation initiative. I'm so sorry, I've had tonsillitis, which gives leadership to young women around the world. And, linking to what Rama said around, this confidence point, when I've heard from young women who have been on the program that when they start, they can't speak, they don't want to put their hand up, they don't want to ask questions. And actually, I've met some of those that have been through the program, and I've put them on the BBC, and they have been amazing. And they have been just, they found their voice. So that voice and keeping that voice and that confidence is really important. But the other side of that, thinking about mentoring, is the whole thing that they talk about, and we've been very involved in, is this idea of reverse mentoring. Because I think we have this, this very connected, this very different perspective from this next generation about what they want, but also their sustainability, their social responsibility views. And in fact, I think we can learn so much from this different, connected, values-driven next gen that can actually shape the future of work, of culture, of the way we do things. So I think, and in turn, those that have been before have a lot to teach them. So I think that the mentoring, reverse mentoring, is a really powerful equation for change and for growth for both sides.
Yeah, and I guess one of the points that came out in the video was the importance of role models, and that's really what you're trying to drive here. It's fantastic, great, thank you. Karma, I'm interested in your perspectives. There's been quite a lot of debate about quotas. Rema mentioned that they're measuring women in leadership, women in the business, which I personally think is an incredibly important thing to do to track progress. But that does lead on to quotas, and I know there's pros and cons to quotas. What are your thoughts?
Well, on a personal level, I'm not always a huge fan of quotas. So I'm both for and against. I suppose I'm sitting on the fence, but I think it depends very much, what context you're talking about. So I do remember a few years ago when working more directly with companies around some of the programs that I was running at that stage in China around gender diversity and addressing stereotyping and so on, that one of the most interesting things I heard was the idea that companies listing on the Australian Stock Exchange required a certain percentage of, I think it was gender parity on the boards of the companies listing on the exchange before they would be accepted for listing, and had to maintain that quota over time as a very powerful expression of the recognition that, in my own country, in the UK, I don't think we've quite reached that position. And in fact, I think the position of women on boards, particularly of listed companies, is going backwards, despite some of the initiatives around this sort of 30% club and so on. But I think it's a very powerful expression of, recognizing women's economic empowerment, but also the real value and the sort of value proposition of more diversity on boards. So diversity of thinking as represented through gender, but also, it's most likely that those women will have come from very, a wider range of backgrounds perhaps as well. And so it's very healthy then, it's seen as being a healthy thing for those companies concerned. So I think if you write, I think the other area where perhaps this is, could be seen to be more positive, so an advantage of gender quotas is perhaps in the area of politics, because I do think that, if nothing else, we're seeing very clearly now, that big decisions are being made in places where actually women are not always at the table where the decisions are being made, or not enough women are at the table. So most recently, some pictures going the rounds of at COP26, there was a gathering of the leaders there, and Angela Merkel always wears a bright jacket, but she stood out very much because there were very few women in the room, and she and Nicola Sturgeon were both wearing bright clothes, but they obviously felt they had to, so people would notice them. And most recently, at some of the meetings in the Munich Security Conference, for example, there was a meeting of CEOs where there were 40 CEOs around a table, and even there was nobody in the room, no females in the room. Even the sort of support staff were all men as well, and that was a powerful demonstration that this idea that issues of that magnitude, and of course the big issue was Russia, Ukraine, needed to be decided in that way, or informed decisions were being made by men. And the same is true of some of the peace talks at the moment between Russia and Ukraine. So I think, our young women as well, our students and so on, and those who are looking for role models need to be able to see that in politics, if we're talking about democratic societies and, elections and so on, that, candidate lists are created that allow women to reach those levels as well. And maybe that can only be done by having very specific quotas in that regard. And, a lot of countries struggle with that, but, it is, it's very important, that women are being able to be facilitated to come through in that way, to be in the places where the big decisions are made. We may have equal rights, but we don't always necessarily have the places in which we can express that equality.
Yeah, and I think some of the big issues that we have in the world at the moment would benefit from more diversity from those decision makers. I think we'd have a different outcome to the outcome we have at the moment. So I think it's a very, very valid point. Thank you, Karma. Before we move on to the next question, I just wanted to remind everyone there is a Q&A function. Please do put your Q&As in for the panelists. We're keen to see your thoughts. Please put your questions forward. We've got about 10 minutes remaining for the discussion, and then we'll go on to Q&A from the audience. So please start thinking about your questions, and I look forward to seeing them in the box there. But let's move on to COVID. And clearly the world is very different to how it was 2 years ago. What has changed? Has it helped the cause? Has it hindered the cause? Roma, I'm keen to hear from you how your working models have changed in your firm after COVID, and what that really means for women in the company.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Perhaps I want to step back a little and talk about why diversity, equity, and inclusion matters to companies. And you said this really well when you introduced the panel, Andrew, and it's partially about a commercial outcome. It's also about inclusion. It's also about innovation, because we have data to suggest that diverse companies actually produce much more innovation. They're much more innovative. And as we think about the future of work, DEI is actually front and center of all of that. Now, I do think the last couple of years has made us much more conscious of what the varying needs are of our workforce. And from a Google perspective, we really view technology, of course, as a key contributor of work-life balance and inclusion, as I talked about earlier. One of the things I just wanted to highlight is Google Workspace, and it's really interesting because it's a multifaceted platform. One of the key capabilities that we have there, of course, is video. And there's an interesting feature in that tool, which is a hand raise feature. And I found that really important as we shift to a hybrid workplace, because it enables anyone to raise their hand, ask a question, make a suggestion. And by the way, in many of our meetings where we have 100, 200 people and someone raises their hand, you actually have to be in a queue. So, and it doesn't matter what level you are in the company. You could be a very junior employee, you could be a senior employee. You have to be in a queue. So there's an equality that basically comes through on the platform. So I think that's a really important thing that we think about as we think about technology, is making sure that it's inclusive, making sure there's a sense of equality there. The second area is, it's not just about the tech, of course, it's also about policies. So we have things like carers leave, of course, a childcare leave, and these are really important policies that we've put into place just over the last couple of years to help particularly female employees who are facing the burden of some of these care kinds of challenges, to basically take that time off and spend the time caring for family members and other loved ones that are just so important to them. And then the final piece is that, I really think COVID over the last couple of years has tested leadership. Leadership has been completely redefined by COVID. Things like expressing a genuine sense of empathy for what your employees are going through is incredibly critical. Creating a safe space for conversations around really, pressing topics like well-being, again, really, really important. So it's really challenged leadership agility around how we make people feel more connected, and particularly for female employees, helping them feel more included in the conversation. And the final thing is, this is really about making all employees' voices heard. So whether it's the tech platform or company policies or leadership empathy, it's really all about making sure that employees have a voice and feel like they're being heard.
Thank you, Roma. Tamara, I know you had some thoughts on this topic. What are your thoughts on the new world after COVID and opportunities for women?
I think that, as we've heard, there have been, we've seen things step backwards through the pandemic, through COVID, in terms of funding for female founders. And some of the feedback as to why, through research conducted by Bohurst, said that actually it was because women weren't having that face-to-face opportunity, and actually the network was even more important. So if you didn't have connections into funding networks, and that's caused it. So we can see an impact there. I think in the world of work, I think as we return, I think we need to be clear, because I believe in the hybrid model and the fact that, there are benefits in terms of some togetherness when working. And I know Rima actually said some really interesting ideas about the way that they're designing that hybrid model last time we spoke. But I've also heard from some of my younger team or younger people in the workforce saying, actually, I want to learn from others. I want to shadow them. I want to see what they're doing. I want to observe differently. I want to build different connections. Some of the working environment that they have at home it is limited. They're in shared households. They don't have an office space where they can work. They're sort of almost, doing timeshare with their flatmates to come and have a video call in the lounge. So I think it's really important. I don't think we've yet cracked it. I think we have to work on how we make it inclusive, how we connect everybody into that as we go forward. And I think I would be very aware of one of the other pieces of insight that we've seen is that there's an in and out culture. So those companies that are going back, you're seeing more men go back, and women who are traditionally playing more of a role in care and picking up the children, dropping off the children, not in all cases, are not there in the same way. So again, you don't want to have two very different levels of integration and actually relationship building.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we learn from the benefits of what we've been through over the last 2 years, and we don't want to just flip back into the office where if you're visible, your voice gets heard. It is important that we're able to work off-site and work hybridly for equal advancement. I think it's a great point. Yeah. And Carmen, how about in UWC? I know it's hard to have a hybrid working model as a teacher, but what are you seeing as an educator?
Well, I think, I think the points that have already been made, and in particular about the importance of having policies that respond to, the impact that COVID has had on those who have more caring responsibilities, for example, on those who perhaps feel less able to go back into the workplace, and just making sure that wherever individuals are, whether they're teaching in front of a classroom, and that's ultimately what we want, is that face-to-face teaching, or whether they're working in admissions, perhaps from home. All of your staff want to be as integrated and is included in what the opportunities are in the workplace, as much as what some of the challenges might be about getting back into the workplace. So I think it's incumbent on employers to put all of their policies, whether it's your leave policies, your specifically targeted flexible policies, and so on, through that sort of filter about what have we learned from COVID, how can we maximize the positive impacts of what we've learned from COVID, versus some of the other challenges that we've all faced, and at times, very few times, but at times in Singapore, the kind of online learning challenges that those working from home have had to become both teachers and doing their own jobs at the same time. Thankfully, that's been a very limited period. But actually, what can we learn from the impact that has had, to ensure that actually with technology and the role of technology, not just as a gadget, but for learning, teaching and learning in the future, that we make the most of that through understanding better what some of the challenges might be for those who continue to want to work from home as well. So really interesting, I think it's very much an opportunity, as much as, of course, it is a challenge in terms of how it's impacted on specific, on different genders and so on as well. It's definitely an opportunity to do things differently and do things better, I think.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you. I can see that the Q&A coming in from the audience, so I'm looking forward to addressing those with the panelists. One last topic I just wanted to cover on before we go to the Q&A was the role of allies and role of males in the drive to improve gender parity. I personally think everyone needs to be brought in on the whole initiative. It can't be just a subset of the population that's driving this change. But how do the panelists see the ability to get allies involved, more people involved in the whole drive here? What's the best way of doing it, and what have you seen works well in your own companies? Maybe Tamara, I can start with you on that one.
I think, picking up on what you said, it's absolutely vital. This is everybody's conversation, and if it's just women having it, we need male allies. We need male allies, and we need everyone in the conversation. I think allyship also goes beneath that. I think, if you look at white women, we used to need to use our privilege and our allyship to help women of colour, because there are different stories. We need to help mothers returning to the workforce, because again, the motherhood tax on pay. So I think allyship is really, really important. I also know through the work that we do with research, with Wealthy Her, we see really different, women, the purpose of their wealth is health, happiness, caring for their family, loved one, comfort. And for men, it's about providing, so there is this responsibility on providing, and yet, people being able to be parents creates equality. So actually enabling men to be parents will play a role in parenting, and obviously they've got that balance of my providing role. And one of the really successful, really interesting things I've seen is actually senior male leaders working as role models to younger men in their organizations, saying it is okay for you to be a parent. I want you to play a role, and rather than there was parental policies, but it wasn't being actively taken up. And that works for women as well, but that's something that I thought was a really positive thing of the role of giving men the chance to actually drive equality as well, and a broader equality.
Yeah, it's a joint effort for the parents in child bringing up. So I think it's important that both the mother and the father takes time out to do that childcare
And
aspect.
actually, yeah, and one of the things, I've seen in my male colleagues has been, they've said, I've had a chance through the pandemic to be with my children. I never want to give that up. I want to do 2 pickups. I want to do, and I think that's been such a heartening, a great thing that we've got from the pandemic, and something, as you say, that does create possibility for everybody.
Yeah, a real silver lining, isn't it? So that's great. Ramona or Cara, any other thoughts on the role of allies in the drive?
I would just say it's very important to speak up. I think that allies need to make sure that people know that they're allies as well. So this is not a quiet thing. I think it has to be, it has to be deliberate in some cases. To know that there are those voices in support, because it goes to advocacy, and without that advocacy, in whatever context, things are not going to change, and that's from a young age going upwards. So, addressing, that piece that I spoke about before around, the stereotyping of career choices, even amongst young children. It's important that both boys and girls of 6 and upwards, really understand, these issues that we've been talking about around gender parity or gender equality of opportunity in the workplace, in relation to gender, that, those are being talked about, and how, it's important not to start defining things in a certain way from a young age. So to exclude opportunities to work together in the future as well, because without that, we're not, without that sort of advocacy piece and understanding, we won't build trust around some of the questions we've had as well around quotas and so on, the measures that might be taken in a slightly blunt way by some employers or some governments, which I think are being helpful in this regard, but actually are not based necessarily on a sort of understanding of what the issues actually are.
Thank you. Thank you, Con. Yeah, please, Roma. Please do. Yeah.
Thank you. Just adding to Carmen's comments, the interesting piece is that sometimes men just don't know how to be allies. It's an interesting concept because, as Karma pointed out, if young people aren't trained on how to do this from a very early age, it's actually quite challenging to learn it. So one of the things that we've actually done at Google, this week has been absolutely amazing with International Women's Day. We've had, of course, lots of programs internal to the company, Googlers speaking, as well as wonderful external speakers as well. We actually have sessions on male allyship. How do men actually come in and act as allies for important women in the company, women who are doing really good work. And, we found that there is incredible followership around sessions like that. So just wanted to throw that in there because I do think that, we can be inclusive and we should be inclusive, and men should be bought in, but we also actually need to share a little bit more about how that can be done.
I think that's such a good point. One of what we've had hacking masculine cultures masterclasses and an amazing turnout of male leaders, and some really interesting insights as well as what's your role as an ally. And was surprised, but as you said, I think people want to say, okay, how? And I think it's a really positive thing. It's how. Show me how, because I want to get involved, but I really don't know how. And what is the role I need to play? And particularly if it's unconscious. So I think those things are so valuable.
Fantastic. There's clearly no lack of intent from the male population. It's just understanding what we can do to help, what we can do to get involved as well. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to help drive that and educate. But great. Thank you for all those comments. We're pretty much wrapped up on the formal part of the panel discussion, but we do have some time for Q&A from the audience, and I can see quite a few are coming in now, so it's great. Thank you for all your questions to the audience. I might just go through some that I've noted down while we've been talking. An interesting question about speaking out, and I think this came out on the lunch on Tuesday, was how to have the difficult discussion. The question here is should those difficult discussions happen? And how do you conduct them? Any advice to the audience from any of the panelists?
It's a very fair and a very good question. I think you always have to have those difficult conversations, but obviously and it goes back to that psychological security point that Ruma spoke about, if you do not feel that you have an environment where in fact that, and that's what that question related to, well, that will be well received. I would also say, is it something that you can get support in having that conversation? So from a colleague or a line manager, or if it's to your line manager, an alternative line manager. So I think it's really important that people have the opportunity and feel safe, but I know that they don't always do, to speak out about issues they might be facing. And I think as leaders and organizations, it's a responsibility to continuously work towards making that possible. I have seen in my I've been working for 20 years now. I cannot quite believe it. In 20 years, such a massive shift and an acceleration in the last 2 years of a culture of it is, and in the world, whether it's Me Too, whether it's Black Lives Matter, actually speaking out, there's been a massive rise that this is acceptable. You have to listen. It's not acceptable. And I also think we've got the other side of the coin, which is economic power. We see that younger people are choosing either not to work for or not to engage economically, buy from. So those organizations that do not create that culture or workforce will not continue to prosper and grow. So I think it's vital to sit up and listen and think there is this shift. We have to be listening, and that is our responsibility, but it's also their opportunity for growth and prosperity.
Yeah, I will just do a major +1 on that, Tamara, because at the end of the day, all employers should really sit up and take note, because women have choices. Women have choices. If you as a leader are creating an environment where women don't feel comfortable speaking out, where they don't have that safe space, where they don't have the courage, because that courage is fostered in the environment, then employers better watch out, because they will lose amazing talent, and that will hit their bottom line. It will hit, their innovation metrics, and the longevity of the company will be at risk.
Very, very valid point, remember, especially during the great resignation that we're seeing across the world at the moment, where people are genuinely leaving for reasons exactly how you're describing, being able to talk and operate openly.
Yeah.
Karma, please.
Can I be a +2 on that one? So I think it's really important that the values that you espouse as an organization are actually values that you put into action as well. So what are the programs or the behaviors that you expect to see from each other, and holding each other to account as well? Because as Rima says, women have choices, right? And somebody put into the chat, I think it was Helen put in the chat, the bot that is being used on Twitter at the moment, which is challenging and holding to account those companies which have been putting out things on International Women's Day about their commitments and their values. And this bot has been going around and actually highlighting how many of them actually have reached those commitments. So what values are they espousing, and how well are they doing? And it's amazing how many are failing considerably on the gender pay gap in particular, despite having identified that as being one of their value-driven programs and so on. So I think it's really important, to really understand as an employer and as an employee, having chosen to work for an organization, what are those values and what do they look like in action as well? And we're all accountable for that, but more so as employers in the first place, I think.
Thank you, Karma. That's great. I'd like to move on to the next question that we have, and maybe stick with you, Karma. Is advice to young girls entering the workforce? What advice would you give to young women starting out in their career in today's market? Maybe if you have any perspectives.
Gosh, what advice would I give individuals? I mean, I think it's important to, follow your dream, right? I mean, if you have a particular, particularly through education and when you're making choices about where to, where you're going to go to university, what you're going to study, that is often with a very particular plan in mind. But if it isn't, if it's very much about following your interests for a while, that too is okay, right? While you explore what the options are. And I think, I often say to those, it's often parents who ask me, what advice would I give in this respect? And I often say, from the time that I went to university to now, at that point, by the time you were 18, you had to have pretty much decided, what you were going to be doing as a career, and you had a sort of certain expectation at the point at which you would retire from that career, and it was often one and the same thing. And I think, we've heard from Ruma about some of the variety of roles she's had in Asia Pacific. And I think it's really important to really, for young people to be able to think through that you don't necessarily have had to make that final choice. You may not be able to have a lifelong career in quite that way in the future as well. We talk a lot about portfolio careers for some, and we talk a lot about some of the challenges around machine learning in this regard, but also the opportunities that come from being able to sort of drive your own career with some of the new opportunities that are arising as well. So I think, keep your eyes open, I would say, follow your dream, but follow your interests, I think is a very important one. It's what I say I have two relatively young daughters who are in that sort of age group, and allow them to think that they don't necessarily have had to make all of these decisions by the time that they're 22, 23, but at some point after that, I'll ask them to.
Very, very good feedback, very good advice there. Thank you, Karma. So Tamara or Rama, any further points on that question?
I think hold the line on your worth. I think we've heard some of the statistics about your confidence will be challenged, but yet we need to hear your voice. And although the work I do with Wealthy Her is saying, how do we change the industries, the cultures that surround women so that they are met openly and and respecting their value. But one of the things I've heard someone say last week, which I've stolen from them, which was have a gob box. And I said, oh, what is this gob box? And it's glimmers of brilliance. Every time you do something brilliant, put it in your box. Every time that someone that you respect say, that was great, I really loved what you did there. And when you are going for a pay review or a new job, look at that, or just remind yourself to celebrate those things. Because when you are holding your worth and you're going into those situations, as women, we often undervalue ourselves. But I think holding the line on that and having these markers that say, well, I might not believe it sometimes, and I am definitely that person at times, but this person I respect believes it, and this is the value I gave, and this is why I believe you should recognize what I am worth.
Very good advice. And thank you, Tamara.
That's wonderful.
Rama,
and maybe I can add one. Sorry, go ahead.
Please do, Rama, please.
No, I was just listening to all this sage advice. It's wonderful. I will add perhaps, just thinking about what Karma said, it almost doesn't matter whether you decide to go into tech or become an entrepreneur or the advice that I give my two daughters, who are probably a little bit older, one is in university and the other one in going to university soon, is get comfortable with being really uncomfortable. Because if you sort of revel in that discomfort, it forces you to try new things, to learn as much as you can, to take on opportunities, to travel to new countries. Which is not sage advice for parents wanting to guide their children, but there are so many different opportunities there that if you get comfortable with that sense of, well, I don't really know everything, maybe I'm not good enough. If you get comfortable with that, then you can really accomplish a lot, and you can aspire to doing more and being more. And that's what I think has helped me in good stead, and that's what I would think about with young people.
Fantastic. So it's having the confidence to go outside your comfort zone and to do new things and to try different things, which is great advice to young people. Maybe staying with you, Roma, and interested in your perspective on this question that's just come through on global companies, and how do you manage cultural sensitivities in global companies? And I know quite often on these initiatives, you get a diktat from the head office in the US or the UK, and everything has to be done in a certain way. How do we adapt our policies to local markets, particularly in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are very much a local company. Yes, you think of Google as a big global company, but at the end of the day, what matters to us is a small business owner sitting in the middle of Indonesia. It matters to us an individual, a schoolgirl, a young person sitting in the middle of Vietnam. I mean, that's what really matters to us. It's our users. We're very foundational in our value system around that. And so, yes, we do have, corporate guidelines and those kinds of things. But part of what I do in my role is I sort of act as a translation engine. There are lots of things that come down from corporate, but at the end of the day, part of what I do in my role, and there are many of us who do this, is ensure that, those big corporate policies land well inside a country. And, for us, that's really, really important because we know that there isn't a one size fits all. We do have a set of core values around respecting the user, respecting the opportunity, and respecting each other. And those core values are absolutely, the foundational aspects of who we are as a company. At the end of the day, we really try to strike a balance between that local flavor and, basically managing, an incredibly large company.
Yeah, it's kind of being attuned to the local market, but also having an understanding of the global policies as well, and balancing that, I guess, across everything. Yeah, great. Any other perspectives from anyone? We've got a great question here. I want to maybe put to Karma, and the question is about whose responsibility is it to drive change? Is it the company, or should we insist it's government or society? I think I know the answer, Karma, but I'd be interested in your views on whose responsibility the drive of change is.
Yeah. Well, I think there's one thing around the drivers of change, but I think it's all of our responsibility to identify how we can, add value to these discussions and how we can make change happen. Because in whatever context we're working or studying or living our lives, there will always be something on which we can have an impact. And whether it's working in allyship with others who are driving the change, and that's part of their job, perhaps, whether it's advocating in a different context, whether it's voting for the people that you want to see in terms of representative diversity as well, where you have that opportunity to do that. I think it is incumbent on all of us to identify what we think our role could be, and then really to commit to it. And it will look very different across different countries, I suspect, as well. But I think it's sort of putting your money where your mouth is as well. That when it's a little bit like the paybot, right? Actually having committed as an employer to doing this, actually following through on that and supporting others, providing those safe spaces that were talked about before to enable those who do want to be driving things, safe spaces and sort of psychological safety to really feel that they feel supported in that as well.
Great, thank you. I agree. I think it's really all of our responsibilities to do that. And any thoughts on that question from the other panelists?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think it is everyone's responsibility. But I was on another panel, and someone made a really interesting point. he'd been trying several years ago to get a bill through that said government procurement, huge procurers in the UK, 842 billion a year, that they have to have a diversity charter in their approach. And while they don't have to award contracts with a quota system, they actually have to have on the consideration list companies that demonstrate their diversity. And I just thought that was such an interesting way of accelerating change. So I think it's a way that government can play a responsibility. It's been very effective in America. So I just thought it was something, and he said it was before his time. So one of the things coming off the call, and he works with the Prince's Trust Enterprise program, he founded that, is actually, let's pick that up again, because there are ways that we can accelerate change. One of the things we're also doing is putting financial literacy on a national curricula, with working with government to do that, because going back to everything Karma said, let's start young, because if we can start young with some of the biases for later in terms of financial literacy, we can change the future. So I think there is a role of government in finding the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a role for government to really act as a catalyst to help all the change here, and implement measures as you suggest to really promote these moves. We have about 5 minutes left, so we've probably got time for one last question. One of the questions that's come in is how do you convince, or how do you persuade passive observers to help, to get involved, to drive change? Any tips on how to get people involved who are maybe disinterested in the whole initiative?
I'm going to steal from Ruma. I think talk about the why. Take it back to why. Businesses perform better with diversity. There's more innovation. Female founders, for example, have higher revenue growth, and they're working to build sustainable, responsible businesses at a greater rate. So I think there are reasons that are good, and then all of the things that we've talked about. So focus on the wins as to why, to try and push against that indifference.
It's the what's in it for me? Why should I be interested? And it's the commercial aspect.
And also, what's the risk? What's the risk of not doing it? As we've all spoken about.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add, one of the themes for International Women's Day is break the bias, but UN Women have a slightly different theme, which is gender equality today for a sustainable tomorrow. And, that sort of encapsulates really how relevant it is to all of us, because whatever our sustainable tomorrow is, and it's not just environmental sustainability, but it's that nexus of the importance of diversity to any aspect of sustainability. We've heard about the sort of financial sustainability aspect as well, but ultimately in any context it's all about our sustainable future, making sure that people are in the right place to make those decisions. So within a business context, if you have colleagues who sort of think they're ticking a box with this, it's important to bring through that aspect, that it's not just tick box exercise of what it says on the website. It's a genuine commitment to acting in such a way that it encourages that sustainability within the company and more generally in society as well.
Yeah, so it's linking to the ESG angle, the social in ESG as well, and the bigger initiative there, and the longevity, I guess.
Yeah.
So perhaps I'll just add one additional comment. Tamara is absolutely spot on. Yes, there's so many business benefits associated with, building diverse teams. I've just been reflecting on sort of a long career of building teams, and I've built some very diverse teams and candidly some not so diverse teams. What I've come to realize is that being inclusive, besides all the business benefits, it's just more fun. You get to meet such interesting people. You get to do such interesting work. And, I tell you, that has been one of my biggest learnings over the years, is that, building a team that is representative of the cultures that Google operates in, that is, gender diverse. An interesting fact is I've got a team of a dozen senior leaders, and 8 of them are women, which is very unusual in tech, especially in Southeast Asia. And I tell you, we have so much fun. So part of, generating the excitement around this is to sort of demonstrate how fun it is. And, that's, I think, another great benefit of really sort of leaning in on this topic.
Thank you, Roma. And you're getting some great shout outs on the chat. I can see a lot of people agreeing with you on that. So it's obviously resonating with the audience. The last question we had was on sponsorship. How do we make it more visible in an organization? And maybe that's a good one for you, Roma, given your recent comments. How do you promote sponsorship? How do you embed it into the company?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, actually, and it requires some very rigorous sort of talent and succession planning. And in many of the companies I've worked for, that succession planning starts very, very early in a person's career. So we track individuals, as they move up the levels of an organization. We track women at that director level. We track women sort of aspiring to be directors. And what I've seen in some very successful companies is, during those talent and succession planning sessions, men actually volunteer to be sponsors of specific women. And those are really important discussions, because those sponsorship conversations can really make a difference when promotions come through. So when you're talking about you've got only a certain number of slots for promotions, that voice at the table of a sponsor can be really, really critical in ensuring that a woman gets into that role versus a man. And so we found it to be very, very effective. It has to be a formalized program, I believe, in order for it to have an impact. There are companies that successfully do this. There are others that are just getting started. But, I think this is firmly not in the hands of HR. It actually sits firmly on the leadership team of whatever organization you sit on.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. It's really business driven, isn't it? It's not a HR driven initiative. It has to be driven by the business, and it's all about the benefits and the discussion we've had on the pros and the commercial aspects that really drive that. But great. I think we are wrapping up for time. I'd love to carry on the conversation. I think it's been absolutely fascinating. But what I'd like to do is just do a closing statement from each of the panelists. Maybe if you could give us your takeaways from the discussion. One thing that you think we can do to break the bias, and then we'll wrap up the session. But maybe I'll start with Tamara.
I think speak out and hold the line on your value. And for everyone on here, do something to actively help someone else to advance.
Love it. Great. Karma, what do you think?
Well, what Tamara said, but if I can only have one thing, I want to, I've learned such a lot from the conversation so far, so more conversations like this, but also I'd like to, for those who haven't read it, suggest a book, and I suggest it to all the young people. You've asked me about some of the conversations I have with young people, a book called Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Caroline Criado Perez. It's a wonderful, wonderful book looking at, the systems of the world and how they were designed with men in mind and how we need to break that particular bias. So I would just say, if there's one thing that you do, if you've got a holiday coming up, read it. It's so important. It'll help you make informed decisions. Wherever you're working, wherever you're studying, you'll have the opportunity to make informed decisions. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Karma. And Roma, your takeaways, what can we do to break the bias?
I was just thinking about that book. Thank you for that recommendation, Karma. So my biggest takeaway is context is really, really important when we're talking about DEI topics. You know, I just reflect back on the example I shared earlier about this very brave woman who I had the privilege to come across in Korea, you know, raising her hand and speaking out, and, you know, the trepidation she must have felt. And so I think that understanding that context in everything that we do is so critical to understanding and empathizing with people. And then if I sort of think about expanding on that to this new world that we're living in around hybrid work, Tamara made an excellent point about how there could be an in-group and an out-group. Well, if you're sitting in a conference room and you've got faces on the screen, the context is really important. You've got to be able to speak out. It doesn't matter whether you're the leader of the conversation or not. You know, draw in the people on the screen. And so it's things like that that I think about when, you know, we think about sort of emerging into this new world of hybrid work and really generating these conversations around breaking the bias. So thank you so much. This is a great conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you to all the panelists, to Tamara, to Rama, to Karma. I personally have learned so much from that discussion. It's been really inspiring, and I'm personally really motivated going forward to continue these kinds of discussions. So thank you for all your insights.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amazing. It was amazing. I have to say, I loved it and learned so much from everybody.
Well, thank you to all the panelists. It's been great contributions there, and really good insights. Thank you also to the audience for your questions. There's some great Q&A there, so thanks for bringing that forward. And on that note, I'll pass over to Richard to close the event.
Andrew, thank you very much, and just brilliant. Just to reiterate, I mean, a really big thank you to all of our panelists, to Tamara, to Karma, to Rama, and to Andrew for your facilitation and just given your valuable time to have this great discussion. Lots of insights, lots of opinions being shared. I've scribbled down a few quotations, but it all really adds to this important discussion and helping to break the bias. And some great questions coming through from the audience. So thank you to everybody who put questions in for your participation. So just to wrap, a big thank you to Barclays again for being our title partner, and to St James's Place, Mercer, NatWest Markets and Swire Shipping for your continuing support as supporting partner. So that just leaves me to say another great thank you to everybody who has joined the call today and who's participated as part of the panel. Helen is showing some upcoming events. I do encourage you to keep looking at the Chamber website, seeing the great content and the events that the team are curating for you. And just finally, thank you and have a great day.